Thank you very much for joining me, William. How's everything, mate?
Oh, it's fine at this end, and the weather's good. It's picked up a bit.
Very good. That's good. Good to have you with us. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, just because it was in recent news this morning, I read an article about an RUC officer in Portadown, I believe, who just got charged with perverting the course of justice in relation to a loyalist murder. And then I think about 2 days ago, there was two men, I think in their 70s, who were getting charged with murdering an RUC officer. And
Yeah,
have you seen those two stories?
yeah. I just sort of caught the end of one today, and that's from in sort of my hometown, where a young guy, a totally innocent lad, was basically kicked to death because of his religion. He was a Catholic. Um, and I think the other one was a murder in the early 70s, as a police officer shot to death, and maybe another officer injured. And there must be some evidence or whatever, maybe DNA or an eyewitness has come forward for that prosecution.
What's it like? I mean, these things took part in a conflict that thankfully isn't. It's long since finished. But yeah, does it bring up? I don't know. Is it like weird hearing like cases from like the early 70s being brought up like literally like 50 years later as an officer, as a former officer, like.
Yeah, I think it is it's nearly this town where I live. The first murder here was in 1972. That was the first murder in 40 years. So this was like, a rural part of Ireland. An unlawful homicide was unheard of. It just, and if there was somebody put in trial for murder, it was nearly like the whole town came out to sort of, to have a nosy at the courthouse. Then all of a sudden, when it started in 1972, it didn't really stop. I think it just overwhelmed people, and then it became very divisive. That was the angle. You'd basically two tribes, you want to describe it that road. And one had their version of history and grievances, and the other one had theirs, and they were the total opposite. And it just went like that for about 3 decades.
Yeah, there was it must be sad seeing, especially like a smaller kind of rural community get torn apart like that. It must be, just as someone who's from there, it must be a difficult thing to experience.
Yeah, it was. Well, my background's working class, and it's a mixed background. And by that I mean it was like, marriages. It's like Catholic and Protestant. Um, and my mother and father were basically two trade unionists, big socialists. And the housing estate I grew up in, it was like everybody went out the early 70s and played football. And then all of a sudden, this thing called the Troubles arrived, and you could just we knew the local cop. He was called Norman. He was a neighborhood cop, neighborhood Bobby, and he'd have kicked a bit of football with you, and everybody knew his name. And he very likable, a big guy, and never had his shirt tucked in. But everybody he knew everybody's name, and he chatted to the mums and dads, and you got on with him. But all of a sudden, you could see it all just started to change, and the first people who were put out of the housing estate were Catholics. So my best mate, I used to turn left to go to one school. He'd turn right and go to another school. And we always asked, why do we go to different schools? If it was in the southern states, and I was sort of like, if I was black and John was white, there'd be a huge outcry. But for some reason, it was you went to school because of religion. So I went to Protestant school. He went to Catholic school. And his family is one of the first ones was put out of the housing estate. So he moved to one end of town. I stayed in this and the other end. But he might as well have moved to the moon. It was that far away. Then division just became normalized. People, especially at working class level, people didn't get to know each other. And all the rumors and all the myths are easy generated about them and us. Sadly, that's just the way it worked.
When you say they got put out, do you remember how exactly they were intimidated out, or was
Yeah.
it a case of physical force was used, or?
Oh no, it was they got a petrol bomb through their front living room, and everybody would have had a good idea in the housing estate who it was. If you live in an estate, you know who the bad guys are. There's not a lot of them. There's always only a few. Sadly, it only takes a few, and everybody could have pointed to who it was. And they moved almost overnight, and it was Mr. Hamill. He basically didn't survive that. I think it was the thought of it, the whole trauma, and he died prematurely. Now he's not down as a troubles death, but you can't, if somebody's sort of trying, burning your house down when you're upstairs sleeping, it's not something that's going to be beneficial for your health. Well, no, but it was very violent the way they were put out. Soon followed by an elderly gentleman 2 doors up from us, only because he was a Catholic, and he was a good friend of my father's. And this guy had served in World War II in the Atlantic convoys. And it was, you couldn't make it up. So it's like people who are seeing themselves as like pro-British and loyalist are putting this man out who actually fought Hitler in a British. It becomes so confusing. But that's the way I distinctly remember that at 7, 8, 9, you could feel everything nearly changing even as a kid.
Remind us what year were you born again?
I was born in 1964.
Okay, see. Well, okay, so when that friend of yours, their family was violently removed from the area, if let's just say you had a cousin from like Cork or something who came up and asked you, like, if they just said, give me like a short explanation as to why that happened, what do you think you'd have told me at the time, being the young boy you were?
Yeah, they had seen that the people who were doing that, they weren't fighting. They were fighting what they perceived was an enemy. So anybody in their books who they consider somebody to be in the IRA, and you're going, it didn't matter who you were. If you're an innocent Catholic, if they decided that you were in it, it was just as simple as that. So their perception was, oh, there's something wrong with this family, and usually that was religion, because religion, it wasn't Catholic against Protestant, it was Irish against British, so it was ethnic. It's just that religion usually was the biggest definer of ethnicity. So it was this thing about, oh, it's Irish and it's the Irish Republican Army, and a lot of it is driven by ignorance of history. But set that aside, it doesn't matter. You have young men full of hate, and they're just saying one thing. They go, oh, that's the Irish, and it's going to be United Ireland. We need to resist this. And then on the other side, you'd be getting sort of from a Republican viewpoint, you'd be going, this is the British oppressors, and we need to unite Ireland because of this evil empire. And that's the two mindsets were just entrenched, and that's the way it was.
Okay, so what would make you joined the RUC in 1982? What would make an 18-year-old who had lived through this decade of incredible violence, even carnage at some stages, what would make a young 18-year-old want to join a police force where I don't know if you knew the stat at the time, but during various years in the Troubles, it was the most dangerous place on earth to be a police officer. I think El Salvador was second even.
That's right. Yeah, no, I think it was, for me, it was naivety more than anything. At 18, I wouldn't have had that much sense, to be honest. I was interested in motorcycles, rugby, and pretty girls, and that was about it. And having a few beers. Even the political situation, I'd have been quite naive of it. When I look back, it's nearly embarrassing. My father and mother were very good, because where we grew up, they'd have got us out. If you remember Sevi Ballesteros, he brought golf to the ordinary people, to the peasants, as I would call it. Before it was almost like a rich person sport. And my father and different people in the estate, they would bring us out to the golf course. So you spent most of your time away from malevolent sort of actors, so to speak. So it's going into the police, was you're thinking, right, well, you know, that's a well enough paid job, you get a half decent pension. I didn't want to go to university. I thought I'd like to start working. But when it came to the whole history bit of Ireland and Northern Ireland, the UK, etc., I was utterly naive of it. I really was.
So like, I mean, obviously by 1982, the IRA well established, their
Hmm.
activities well known, all that kind of thing. Was there any degree of wanting to stop them or take them on or anything?
I think it's. I went to I shared a room. Me and a guy shared a room in a border station in Newton Hamilton in South Armagh, and he was a Catholic and I was a Protestant, and he just turned 19, I was 18, and the two of us were widely ignorant of not only loyalist terrorism but Republican terrorism, and what we felt was we were mostly at times down there. The security aspect was mostly the provisional IRA, but very rarely did we stop anybody who was a suspect. You didn't really tend to see them. You'd go to a crime scene, maybe a few police officers murdered, soldiers murdered, civilians murdered. But I never. I was I think it was 5 years before I seen a dead terrorist at all. It was nearly that. Well, where are these? I know they're suspects, but when you stop a lot of suspects, they're actually quite nice to you, and you start to go, are these suspects?
So
So
you
as a
were,
uniform officer, it was, yep, you seen a lot of bits and pieces, but it was, you never got any sense that you were in the middle of a war, because it wasn't that busy. The odd time there'd be a mortar attack, a bomb attack, a shooting, but it wasn't as if it was happening every day. You know, it could be a few weeks go by and you're mostly dealing with stray dogs, enforcing licensing laws, car accidents, and then all of a sudden it'll be a massive landmine somewhere that's killed maybe 3 or 4 soldiers, and then you put up a scene. The bodies are taken away. There's an investigation. Usually nobody's made amenable, and then you just continue again.
did you say you were an officer like policing South Armagh, yeah?
Yeah, it was most of my time was road traffic accidents. I remember most of my paperwork was uh, usually a fatal road traffic accident or a sudden death, um, and it's at times you've been attending scenes that'll be murder scenes that be terrorist related, but it didn't occupy most of your time. It's quite bizarre because you're trying to deal with the ordinary stuff that a cop deals with, but at the same time also the stuff of people trying to murder you. There's like it's a blend of the two.
I was going to say, I mean, I'm almost surprised to hear it, given South Armagh is it literally known as bandit country. I think
Yeah,
about 1/5 of all British
yeah.
soldiers killed were killed in this 200 square mile rural area. I even for like going out investigating or clearing up, after like a landmine attack. I've heard that the RUC couldn't even operate on their own. They needed like
No,
military support and
no.
stuff.
I was fortunate because the South Armagh is nearly like there's a where it comes to Crossmaglen and Fork Hill, that would have been more of the sort of the hotbed area. I was Newton Hamilton, which was more in it's South Armagh, but was more in the fringes. And we had a couple of police vehicles which went out usually at night time, whereas Crossmaglen and Fork Hill, um, I'd say they were rougher areas. They were taking more of a hammering. I had the fortunate position where you got more normal policing done, but you also there's parts that when you go into deeper towards in South Armagh, you you didn't go during the day, and at times you didn't go during the night. But I was, yeah, what they call bandit country. I was at the sort of periphery of it. I wasn't right in the heart of it.
Okay, interesting. Did you view the South Armagh IRA as being like a more competent or committed kind of group than some of the urban ones? I know they're certainly known by by soldiers. They were revered kind of in a different, I don't know, revered isn't the right word, but they were kind of, their abilities were respected in a different way to the urban units.
Yeah, I think they're just yeah, they were nearly like an army, and their speak within an army. They were almost self-contained, because you had basically a bunch of old smuggling families. So they almost had their network and all their alliances already in place when it came to terrorism, where everyone else was struggling about, we need a small team, can we trust each other? They had that instantly. And they're they're clever because they don't become very ambitious. They weren't that flamboyant. Anything they did was well within their capabilities, and they tended to stay within their area. Like, they didn't, travel away up to North Armagh or Belfast, or they stayed within their area, and that's where they did their hits. And I think it was like they were just so much of a cut above the rest. They were very good at what they did, and there was I don't think we hardly landed a glove on them, to be honest.
I was going to say, I interviewed Harry McCallion before, who was he's actually ex RUC as well, but I spoke to him about his SAS time, and he said there was actually an RUC officer that briefed them and said, listen, you have to treat the South Armagh IRA as if they're proper soldiers. Like that you can't kind of treat them like they're just like substandard guerrilla soldiers, like the other fellas. The other thing as well, it must have been again, you weren't like right down in the south of it, but the fact that they could use the border so well, they could flee across it, they can even attack from across the border. The Warren Point bomb, for example, was remoted from across. Was that frustrated? Would you hear that from other officers?
Yeah, it was. I started my career at Newton Hamilton, and then spent a bit of time in Crossmaglen, in the heart of it. And then when I went more to the intelligence world, I operated more in South Armagh, and it was, you don't go out unless you have a real reason, and there's a plan to go out, where you're going, how long you're spending time there. And the border is just, it was sanctuary, it was touching distance away. So a lot of it, you just hear any incidents I was involved in, it was usually a lot of gunfire, a bomb, and then when you got a chance to get your head up, everybody was gone. You don't get. I never fired a round. I never fired one single shot. And you're going, and that's the experience of most police here. It's not as if you were in these big gun battles. You're going, dude, it just happens that quickly. By the time you hit the deck and get yourself on cover and get your head back up, it's all over. They're away. You don't get a chance to return fire or do anything. You're usually left with a destroyed building and a few corpses.
They also had I guess being out in the countryside and kind of having more space and being less molested by different security forces, they were able to kind of I think be like creative in ways the others weren't. I'm thinking for there's a photo of them having this big mortar on the back of a tractor that they could use. At one stage they used like a slurry spreader they turned into a flamethrower. There was that time they put a van on the tracks beside like a roadblock to blow it up. There was like a creativity that I think they could get away with a bit more.
Yeah, they were cutting edge, and I think that the biggest truck bomb here, the biggest bomb in the history of what we call the Troubles, I think it was £3,000, and it was very clever. They put it beside the Northern Ireland Forensic Science Laboratory, and just, it's like, it was devastation. It was like a Oppenheimer scale type, with a mushroom cloud. So they were just a notch above the rest, but they took their time. They didn't rush things. If they thought there was something not quite right, they didn't go for it. Other organizations and gangs did, and they were more, there's more of a frequency of attack. Where in South Armagh, you could go for a long period and there's nothing, and then all of a sudden, bang. So they were methodical and they had that trust amongst them, that I think at the end, the only functioning sort of brigade of the provisional IRA was South Armagh for about the last decade. They essentially were armed struggle towards the end.
Right, yeah. I've heard they were kind of tougher to control and tougher to bring along with
Yeah.
with like the political movement. That they were a lot more kind of hardline. Apparently, it's rumored anyway that the East Tyrone A team was kind of set up at Loughgall, possibly by higher up Republicans who were looking to go towards more political means, and but the East Tyrone fellas wouldn't have come along with them, so so they were wiped out. That's one of the theories, at least, anyway.
That's right. Yeah. No. Yeah. I've heard that. I think it's probably what East Tyrone. I mean, when the way we labelled them when I was writing about them, intelligence, it was East Tyrone and Monaghan para, and it was South Armagh and North Louth para. That it was a cross-border element, but East Tyrone and Monaghan were very ambitious. They were more like, they wanted the Tet offensive. They wanted this flying column along the border, and they were going, away to targets that maybe 90-minute drive in from the border. So they were they were increasing the risk to them dramatically. And then you had it where they're talking about Jim Lyon and Patrick McKerney had were looking at breakaway provisional IRA, and they were a threat to the movement. And then the movement set them up. But I think it's one of these things that nearly give them enough autonomy that it was going to happen to them at some point, because there were big set piece operations. At Loughgall there was 8, a support team of maybe, I don't know, 20 or 30. So that's a lot of people. And you're risking then somebody leaking something, whether it's somebody talking to somebody like me or just a casual conversation on a telephone or something, and you pick it up. Where South Armagh tended to keep it very tight and didn't go for those sort of like huge spectacular targets. Loughgall is a predominantly Protestant village in North Armagh. It's nowhere near the East Tyrone Monaghan area, really. So it was just, I think they overstretched, and given time, I think it came a point where you just get wind of it.
Interesting. Okay.
Can't stop it.
I gotcha. Okay, so I mean, many at the time in the North would have seen the RUC as being like very much against them, working against their interests, an oppressive group. At the time of joining, could you have like empathized with that point of view? I'm sure you didn't hold it, obviously, but was it one that kind of made sense to you on some level if you were looking at it from someone else's eyes?
Yeah, it did. Strangely, it was my first two. I told you about Norman, the beat Bobby. He was a great guy. Well, he could no longer come back into the state, because when a conflict like Northern Ireland happens, it's the same in Afghanistan or Iraq. The first people they get rid of is like the normal cops, the friendly, friendly guard, the beat Bobby that everybody knows. They go, you can't afford for a community to see a police officer as somebody to trust and friendly. So you get them out, and then you get the tougher former cop comes in with the body armor, with the rifles. And I remember as a kid, me and my mate going for fish and chips, and these two guys come running around the corner and hop over a fence, a garden fence that had a panel fencing of about 6 foot high, and they div over the panel fence. And then there was about 3 or 4 cops came running round, about a minute later, and then this guy, and he was really gruff, and he said, "Where to go?" And me and our mate instinctively pointed the wrong direction. And I don't know why. To this day, I'm going, you'd have thought the cops run off, the 2 guys pop over, wink at us, and off they go. I have no idea who they were, what they did. But it was It was that aspect. They go, well, I didn't like those cops. And then before I joined the police, I love motorbikes, and I was prosecuted twice. Once for speeding. I'm going, yeah, fair enough. But the guy said he let me off with a warning, and a summons came through the door, and my mother and father went mad. And then the next time, it was no L plate on the back of a GT 185 Suzuki. And I went, really? This place is falling apart. I'm 17. This place is falling apart, and I'm getting prosecuted for no rear L plate on the back of my motorcycle. So I was at court twice. And when I was being interviewed by the recruiting sergeant, joined the police, my mum was going, do you know he's been in trouble with the police? Why are you accepting him? Because he's been prosecuted twice. You shouldn't be taking somebody like this. I'm thinking I'm never going to get into the police. So it wasn't the aspect from a sort of like, you talk about an Irish nationalist Republican, but I didn't have a great love for a lot of cops, even though I joined the police. And I turned around and go, yeah, I like Norman, but I didn't like these guys. And then when you get in, you become very conscious of how do you police an area. At times it's very the likes of, some areas that are hostile, and probably with South Armagh, it's called bandit country, but South Armagh is just full of really, really good people. But it's very difficult because all of a sudden there's there's a menace there, and they can't be seen to sort of, just watch yourself going down there. So you just got to play it. You got to play it sort of cannily. But it was conscious. Yeah, the police. You know what? The police. The first thing happens for chaos like this is the state gets in its own road, and it overreacts, and it becomes part of the problem, not part of the solution. And the RUC was imperfect, and at the start, it just wasn't professional enough to see, well, how do we respond to this? So it actually takes a while for policing to realize, it's like, how do you become more professional? And even when you're starting to think about why could we be part of the problem? Well, because we're predominantly one side, it's a predominantly Protestant organization. Is there going to be a natural bias against Catholics, against Irish? Once you start to think like that, you're starting to turn around and go, hold on, you're starting to professionalize. But that took some time to sink in at the start. It always does, whether it's wherever this happens, it's trying to show whoever's responding to it that you can become a part of the problem, and usually are at the start. And you got to start to learn very, very quickly how you become part of the solution. So yeah, I could see why even traditionally in history, from Cromwell, from the famine, from the rising, all this about there's an aspect about British oppression, and then with the RUC and what came to internment and stuff that went, this is just Cromwell again. This is bad politics, single unionist rule, etc. So I could see how, yeah, people viewed me as part of a police state enforcing like orange tyranny. Yeah.
I actually just interviewed an ex-SAS fellow, his name is McHawks, and he was saying that he kind of felt for the RUC fellas a bit more than the army guys, because the army fellas would come and land, do a tour, and then they're gone. They're kind of out of rotation. Not the case with you. You live there, kids going to school there, you've family roots. It's much easier. You can't like doorstep when the IRA would shoot someone on their door. You can't really doorstep army people because they live on a bloody base.
Right.
You all live in normal houses and stuff. What was it like? It must have been different being a security force member, but also being there and being a lot more vulnerable than the army and other groups,
It is. It's totally different because you're right. You're local, and it's a bit like after partition. You look at the War of Independence. That brought a lot of special branch guys. That brought them from the RIC. So before the Garda was really established, and they were looking to clear up remnants of the old IRA, the sort of, and after the Civil War and after this. And the difficulty is, it's your local. It's like you live in the same land, you're of the same soil. So it's when everybody leaves, you're going, but we're still here. It's like, and it is, yeah, it's fundamentally different of how you live your life, because you're going, well, hold on, is the guys trying to murder me just live down the road? They know my name, they know where I live, and it's a totally different dynamic. I've been under threat. I've had moved house 3 times, um, twice from loyalists, and once from it was the real IRA after the peace deal. So you're always you were trying to live a normal family life, and have it where the kids weren't part of it, and you weren't frightening the life out of them, and at the same time sort of get your job done. But it's knowing, it's nearly as if, well, hold on, you're going, if you go across the Irish Sea, it's not to say that stereotype everybody, but it's like, I'm as much a potty as everybody else. You turn around and go, I'm the potty cop. It's like, oh, those guys, they're hard, their accent's quite strange, and you're right. It's like the British Army. A lot of the guys, very good friends of mine, that get up, but they're way back to Kent and Suffolk, and you're still here, and it'll be the old rumors, the old myths that just keep continuing. That don't, in fact, they get probably stronger after there's a peace.
I was going to ask you there. You mentioned having to move house like 3 times. How did you find out about each one of them? How did it like filter down to you?
One, usually twice was it was coming back from, it was intelligence reports. I think the first one was funny. It always stuck with me, and it is living with my mother and father, and it was actually working in Crossmaglen in the middle of South Armagh, and there'd been an armed robbery, and we'd responded to it. Like the next day, we'd went, and there was an explosion, but it was only the detonator of a bomb went off. We should all have been dead, and we're going, we're lucky we're alive. So we're laying fields for like 2 nights with the scene before the army come in and make the bombs safe and do all their bits and pieces and go away. And in the middle of being there, I'm told that that loyalists have identified you in a riot squad beating Protestants in Portadown. I went, that's a neat trick. Me being here. But again, we're back to perception. It doesn't matter. Somebody gets your name to go, oh, he was beating Protestants in that day. So it was my first time where it was basically Special Branch were saying, look, you can't go home. So that's where it forced me to sort of buy a house, because I'd lived with my parents. And then they suffered from sort of different attacks over the years, getting their windows put in, because I didn't realize that me joining the police sort of made them the threat visited them. It wouldn't have if I hadn't joined the police, and that I never thought of it that road before.
Jeez, that must have been tough, kind of when your actions don't just the responsibility of them doesn't just fall on you, but someone else. Christ above. I was going to ask you there on kind of on that note. The two ex-RUC men I've interviewed so far, Colin Breen and Stephen White, they both had quite interesting stories about getting recognized off the job, because of course we're not dealing with like a terribly big area.
No.
I mean the 6 counties, I think during most of the conflict was like around about a 1.5 million people. Did you ever get recognized like off duty by people you previously arrested or interrogated or worked with in some way?
That's fortunate. As you're right, this place is a big village. It's like it's parochial. Everybody knows everyone else. I was probably fortunate because I stayed in rugby. I kept playing the rugby. So I played, and it was an All Ireland League. So I was down to Cork. I was down everywhere. You weren't meant to, but I did. So I managed to sort of do that and live as normal a life as I could. And I seen the whole island, about down. I wanted to be Hugo McNeil. He was the Irish fullback. So It's like my early days of school was going down to Lansdowne Road at a time that you could run onto the pitch at, when the final whistle goes and stuff. So I had, when I was playing rugby, it was the All Ireland League. You're traveling all these places, and it's nearly you forgot about what was happening here. And I didn't really frequent the places that I'd bump into some of the people that I met. So it was, you turn around going, people would say, you're going, where are you? Well, I'm heading down to Shannon this weekend. Oh, you shouldn't be going there. So a lot of them, I was nearly avoiding people because of where I was going. Even taking holidays, I would take them to, different places in France where tourists really didn't go, off the beaten track. So it was that road. And as I said earlier, there's a lot of bars, 90%, 95% really of pubs you just don't go into. Simple as that. So you know where to go, where not to go to avoid that. You can be unlucky to maybe bump into somebody at a supermarket or whatever, but I'd never anything as bad as being sort of, straight into meeting one of the bad guys.
Interesting. Okay, well, fair enough. Okay, so the bulk of what I want to ask you about is your special branch time, given it's so unique and so interesting. What year did you join special branch?
Funny you mentioned Harry McGartland earlier. I did a surveillance selection with him. So I did, and it was like, it's like something you see out of SAS selection. To do the usual, the beasting and the run you, and I think it was 7 days. But because you were young and you didn't realize how fit you were when you were young, did that. But quite quickly, I realized in the further training, I'm no good at surveillance.
What year was it? What year was it?
I think that was 87, maybe 87, 88, something like that. And then it was about a year later, I went for it was like the SWAT side of it, where the door kickers, as they would call it, did the selection there. And it was more, oh yeah, I think my skills are more amenable to this. So that was my pathway into the sort of special branch. It was the armed response end of it.
Oh, I see. Okay, so were you ever a handler?
Yeah, I went from there. I went to the as promoted out as a sergeant, came back in as a staff officer to the regional head of special branch for a few years, and then I went into the sort of handling side, and that would have been maybe early 90s, 93, 94, something like that, maybe a bit later. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Wow. Okay, so I suppose, like, okay, you were a handler. Can you tell me about how you transition into being like a full handler, where you have agents and informants that you're running? How do you kind of get trained up to it?
No, same thing for the. So if you imagine the different disciplines to sort, if you wanted to go into handling, you had to go through the whole selection thing again, because it's not for everybody. It's to see, and they do it. There's quite a bit of science behind it about who's going to be suitable, who's not. So, for instance, when I went for the SWAT, it was, you wanted to get. Everybody goes into that. A lot of people go in to think it's just like, just shoot everything, and you go, it's the exact opposite. So they had a system that got rid of the sort of like the alpha males, the way I describe it. And you get that was the same with handling, to go, right, there are different things they're looking for. And there was, I think the attrition rate there, I don't know, by the end of it was maybe 10, 15% you got through. So it wasn't guaranteed that I'd get through just because I'd been in a special branch. And a lot of their scenarios were, how do you talk to people? It was just basic. How do you talk to somebody? How do you have a good argument? As in your head, to sort of turn around and go, right, to put to somebody to go, right, well, this is what we'll have. Here's the call it thing. It was they call it the drama triangle. It's like victim, persecutor, rescuer. So you turn around. So say if you have a target, and you have a chance to get in front of them, you're turning around going, you're basically showing them that they're the victim. That the organization they're part of is the persecutor, and you're there to rescue them. That's the psychology, the science behind it. That's how you portray yourself. You sort of portray them without actually naming it, and you're going, well, the organization you're part of now, is that the sort of the type of life you want? But a lot of it was just, how do you engage with people? How do you talk to people?
I was going to say, okay, so can you explain the differences between an informer and an agent from your point of view?
Yeah, you see, at the start, they call it informer, they call it source, they call it agent. It's informer's just what everybody knows it to be. When I did it, it was called source handling, source management. Source is a better word, because it doesn't define source. You could talk about a source, the source states, but the source could be a telephone intercept, eavesdropping, surveillance, also human. Whereas agent is like, if anybody overheard you, it's just very identifiable. Go, that's a person. So I always use the word source, because it gives you a bit of, it's abstract. So source, agent are roughly the same thing. Now they call it a covert human intelligence source, CHIS. And there's a definition of half a page long, and I defy anybody who knows it. But it's basically, it's a source. It's someone usually, you're going to have an eyes and ears, you're going to have access, and you're going to have basically your primary source, and that's somebody who would be in a terrorist organization. Your eyes and your access is somebody just in the periphery, and eyes and ears is somebody's not, but would sort of maybe know people who are and give you details. So it's like just different categories. So once you get to the top of you, somebody within a terrorist organization, that carries all the more risk, but the more reward, isn't it? It's a turn around and go, the lower you go, you're going less risk, but you're going to get less insight.
I know that another group under the Army branch, the FRU, also they're well known for running agents or sources or whatever. I know that in some cases they would recruit someone who wasn't in a particular group and then get them to go into the group, like under the direction. Was that anything that ye did, or was it just people who like already were pre-existing within the IRA or whatever? Did you ever get fellas who weren't in the group and then get them to go in and infiltrate?
The sort of the military, and they would have, where I was, and I'd say within South region where I operated mostly, there was no military. We were fortunate; it was just us. They predominantly, I think that maybe they had maybe if it came to it, was always the joke is they run half a source. But my boss, who was old CID guy, and he never let them in. The people I'd have sort of worked with most or had a talk to would have been RUC Special Branch, would have been at a chat, but I had very, very little dealings with the FRU. They'd have obviously recruited certain sources, but they seemed to have been mostly Belfast and the odd time in Derry City. So where it came to the sources, any really good, I'd say high quality sources, the first people I had to recruit, John, the most important people were constables, were uniform officers, and CID detectives. I had to brief them on the threat. I had to brief them, and here's the people to look out for. This is what the threat looks like. Here's the tactics, etc. And you're briefing them on suspects. And so what happened was I'd make a connection with them because you're briefing them and talking to them daily over a coffee or a formal briefing, but they got to know you. And you'll find then that anybody who I ended up talking to, it was usually a uniform officer who introduced me. And it could be something as simple as a road traffic accident, a fatal road traffic accident. And a uniform officer say it's a bad guy, and they turn around and go, do you know what? She was really professional there, and treated me really well. And they come up and say, look, I have a few things to chat to you about. And she would say, well, hold on, if you don't mind, I can introduce you to somebody. That's how I got most of my good sources, was being introduced. It wasn't, there was no great Mission Impossible to it, or or Jason Bourne. It was briefing, educating your front line, and having them basically work for you to go, look, if anybody turn around and saying, right, they're looking to talk to somebody about something confidential, give me a call. And that's 9 times out of 10, that's how it worked for me. So, and it was usually people, because if you knew of what the gang was, or the sales structure, you knew the people you wanted to talk to. You didn't want to talk to the psychos, the leadership. You wanted to talk to that redeemable peripheral figure who's in it, and you're going, right, okay, and then that's where you operate from. But I never, I've others maybe differ. I've never had to get somebody to put them in. They're already in.
Okay, very interesting. We kind of touched on it there briefly. Was there like a general type that you would come across who would become informants? I've heard sometimes they would look for lads who kind of maybe they viewed themselves as like kind of special, or you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be a mixed bag. It can be somebody is nearly like self-survival. And by the 90s, I would say a lot could see the writing on the wall that it's early 70s, you'd have thought Northern Ireland's going down the plug hole. In the 90s, they're going, oh, this ain't going to end well for us. So some of it was self-survival, and that was their big motivation. A constant is money. It always is. It's economics to go, well, what do you get paid for this? And then a few is the motivation is just they want to do the right thing. There's an element with a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. There's an element that this island back then, not so much now, but back then, it didn't matter if you were a Protestant or a Catholic, you were a Christian, and you were brought up going to church, and you're brought up by your parents to respect your neighbor, and you knew that murder was wrong, you knew that stealing was wrong. So there was a conscience. It wasn't as if, and these people had come into organizations that if politics here hadn't been so rotten, they wouldn't have been in it. So there was these different things. If you package that together, and it looks as if you have a bit of knowledge and you know what you're talking about, and show a bit of empathy, you could actually see with a lot of them, my experience was they wanted to do the right thing. And then, but you have different motivations. It could be the right thing tied on with, but I like money, and doing the right thing because I think you're going to catch up with me one way or another sooner or later. And that was some of them. It was, I have a couple didn't want to take money, didn't. It was, there was an angle where they could see people within the organization and they just didn't like them, to go, these are really evil people. And they wanted genuinely to help to put them in prison. So it's, I would always say when I was training this, and I went into sort of special branch training, they go, you think of a motivation as like you bring in a bag. Don't ever think, you think, oh, this guy in front of us is going to be money. If it's not money, what's the next factor? What's the next? You should, because there's usually one that's like more than one motivational factor, and you have to wrap that in an argument in a way that they turn around and warm to you.
I know it definitely happened with some. I don't know how common it was, where fellas would get caught for a particular crime, be it something big or something small, and using that they can get offered like a get out of jail free card to go work as an agent. Did you ever recruit fellas by them getting caught by something and then offering to let it slide to become an agent?
You see, the thing is, there's a great myth, and it's probably one of the biggest losses here. So in the States, when you had in New York, when you had all the big crime families, I think it was 5 big crime families, the mafia, and the Chicago mob, etc., that have basically somebody turning supergrass that testify on behalf of the state. and they'd wipe out like 1 or 2 families in one go, because this person would get up in the witness box, testify against them, and they'd all go to prison. They tried that here, called the Supergrass system. Now, they also did the same thing, the Supergrass system, with the Red Brigades in Italy, and they did it in England with the likes of the Cray twins, etc. They did it here, but it didn't work, because it was nearly like it's the propaganda machine of the provisionals turn around and start go, but these are paid perjurers. Bottom line is, it collapsed. But I reckon the Belfast Good Friday Agreement would have been maybe 10 years ahead of its time had the Supergrass system run, because it was putting the likes of East Tyrone, Monaghan and Barret, it's like they were devastated by it. And it was only a matter of time before it was South Armagh, North Louth. Loyalists it was devastating both sides, because all of a sudden they're thinking, one guy turns on us and all of us are in prison. And that was a huge factor in going against organised and serious crime in the States, but it didn't work here. And that was the only time where somebody could have come up to you and said, look, I've been involved in all these murders. And they basically confessed them, and the deal being done, it's nearly like a district attorney comes in to go, right, here's the deal. If you do that, we'll give you a reduced sentence, as in minimal, for testifying against that. And then afterwards, we'll resettle you in a witness protection program. That wasn't available here when the Supergrass system went. So I didn't have any leverage of going, okay, I know we have you pinned here, and CID are going to arrest you and prosecute you because you have fingerprints on a gun for a murder or an armed robbery. That just, if that happened, he was getting arrested. So it was probably the highest that I've went was getting a drink driving squared. That was as high, a DIC, drunken charge, and you had to put in a report, a lengthy report, basically saying why, and what this person is likely to tell us. And if the prosecution, if I don't prosecute them, this is the benefits it's going to be to the public and public safety. But that was basically as high as it got. That's for me.
There's a famous case that ended up with a book and a film by Martin McGartland.
Yes.
And he, I believe he was 16 or 17, and he got caught for some low-level kind of stolen goods stuff and became an agent through that. He later described the process as he described it as like a grooming process, that he was like very naive and got kind of groomed into being more of an informer by RUC. Like things like that. Did you come across much?
Yeah, I think what happens is, my experience is, it's the more you like somebody, the less you're going to, the less able you are nearly to protect them. It's almost you have to stand back and be quite cold and objective, and constantly nearly disbelieving them. Always a really healthy skeptic of what they say, as opposed to, oh, everything they say is gospel. That's the aspect. Is it's a personal relationship. I don't think and human relationships are always prone to sort of flaws and failures. I think it's once you get into that relationship where you're pretending to be somebody that you're not when you're in the organization. So you're leading a double life, and the only person that you can really confide in is your handlers. So yeah, I can see why somebody turn around when you're in that position. You're going, God, it's like, I'm now in this. Do they are they being groomed for it? But it's probably, from their point of view, it's the difficulty is they now think that they're protected because the handlers and everybody know everything, and you're going, but they don't. There's a limited knowledge there too, and you're always trying to impress them. Don't change your behavior. You're not Superman anymore to go, like, if things go down and you get caught, you're caught. And the whole thing is, with recruiting somebody like that, is you have to catch the bad guys. there has to be a criminal justice strategy. This can't go on forever. It can't go on for 5, 10, 15 years. It shouldn't. There has to be a point where, with two psychos who are gunmen and a leader, we want these guys put away. So the whole purpose of getting the information is at some point it leads to a chance where you put the really bad guys away. And that's the relationship. It's, you know, people can walk away from the relationship anytime they want to. A lot of times it's nearly they've turned around, they become used to it, they become familiar. A lot of times they do build up strong bonds, but I can see why it's, you know, even for, you know, people who've been resettled, you come with an expiry date, whether you're a handler or a source. You know, once it's over, it's over. You know, you go away, you're off stage, and it's finished. And it's this thing. It's like high octane. There's a lot of adrenaline. It can be very exciting. You can feel as if you are that spy, when in reality it's quite normal most of the time. That's the thing.
I was going to say, okay, so Martin McGartland obviously was caught for some small kind of Mickey Mouse stuff and
Yes.
with an agent. I'm thinking on the other end of the scale, I'm thinking like Ken Barret. Ken Barret was recruited as an RUC agent after admitting that he shot Pat Finucane. Do you think that kind of thing shouldn't have been the case at all? Taking on a fellow who admitted to murdering a lawyer.
No, I know it's the boss we had. You'd have had no chance, absolutely no chance of something like that. And I think it was, it's one of these things to go, at what point? I can see, I know we're handlers in the past. So if you imagine that, like, Norman is the guy in the estate and he's his pulse on the people, on local people, and he roughly knows what's happening. Now you don't have nobody's testifying in court against bad guys, but we still need bad guys to go to prison. So the only thing you have is intelligence, and it's imperfect and it's limited. So I know handlers who've recruited people and then all of a sudden have realized, but it's only afterwards, that these people have been involved in murder. But they haven't been, it wasn't the angle to recruit them. It came out that they were, but you didn't know. That's why it's where we were. You're always trying to think, okay, so we're going to talk to somebody. It's like, roughly, we know what they've been involved on. This isn't the psycho. So whether Barret, whether that people knew that at the time, I don't know. I would, from my training, the way I was trained, I was seriously doubted. But I wouldn't doubt that a source would turn around and keep that from you, because that would impact on them then becoming a source.
No, apparently I wasn't there or anything, but I have read that Barret did he was recruited after admitting it. I mean, there was other cases then. There was other cases where sources would like commit serious crimes while being a source. I'm thinking of William Stobie. Speaking of Pat Finucane murder, there's also in the 90s Mark Haddock. I believe. I don't want to liable or anything, but like I think it's believed he was involved in numerous murders while being an agent. Can you talk to us about this kind of balance about having to let a source, okay, if they're to maintain their place in a paramilitary organization, they have to commit crimes, otherwise it'll be incredibly suspicious they'll be found out. But at the same time, you can't have like a Mark Haddock going around being a fucking like almost a serial killer while being an agent. Can you talk to me about that kind of tightrope to walk?
Well, I can tell you the way I was trained and the way and how I trained it. I can tell you about the boss, my boss, who was the chief superintendent, who actually who ran us. He was in control of us. So when you're looking at a gang, whether it's Loyalist or Republican, whatever, so it's a gang. They're in a terrorist organization. Terrorist organizations by nature are dedicated to murder. They're just one huge conspiracy to murder. It happens, and they talk about it. The way me and you would talk about the weather or sport is just constant about different murders. So you look at a gang, and the best way to describe it is you're looking to talk to the horse holder. So you know when the cowboys come into town to rob the bank, right? But two psychos go in and they'll shoot up the bank teller, and they go mad within the bank. And then you'll have the gang leader, and he'll be there in his big long trench coat, and he'll be a cigar, smoking a cigar. He's running everything. The lad outside holding the horses outside the bank, that's the person you want to be talking to. So you have to figure out, in the threat that you're looking at in your area at that time, who are the people causing the problems that you need to put behind bars, because you don't want to be talking to one of the psychos or to the leader. That's as a given. That's where then you touch base with the CID detectives to go, right, for different murders, who are they after? What are they after? Even when it comes to somebody that you're talking to, I'd have went to my opposite number in CID to go, have you used anything on different people? Him being one of them, and then we're going, no. A lot of the times when people talk about they have evidence, it's not they believe such and such was involved or he was involved or whatever. There's no, actually, there's a fingerprint here and he's going away. So intelligence is not evidence. A lot of intelligence will put people down to a certain instant, but it's not always about who's firing the trigger, who's the finger man. It's nearly who's the least worst in the gang. Who do we look at? And that's from where I was, that was the thing to go, right? If there was, say there was a murder, you're sitting at home, you turn around and go, God, there's been an incident, there's somebody killed in your area, they're murdered. The first thing you'd be thinking of, our friend, what was his role? If that was his gang, why didn't he call us? Because we give him 1,001 reasons why he could call us, how he could contact. And if he was involved, we've given him a lot of reason. We've got a lot of things that he's run over of how that could have been stopped or prevented, that you just don't accept to go, but it's no choice. That's where you become really skeptical. You go, seriously? That you couldn't have done, that maybe you could not, that car, you couldn't have sort of just accidentally reversed it into the back of something or done this or, so you would always be asking, because my boss would be going, what was his role? It's the first thing you'd be into, what is his role? And it has happened, I know colleagues it's happened to, where the guy, he's been the shooter. And then there's been a situation where they've gradually talked to him and then got a CID guy out who's then talked to him and cautioned him. And I've seen people, sources, who've been arrested for murder. Nobody knows the word sort, but you're going, you did what? So it's that aspect is good. You shouldn't be. It's like the way it works. Yes, they're part of a criminal enterprise that is dedicated to murder, but they can't be the ones doing it. That's not the way it works. They have to be, the reason they're there to turn around and go is to catch the people who are doing it. That's the whole raison d'etre for it. Otherwise, you just perpetuate the bloody thing. It just keeps going from place to place. Now, that's the way I was trained, the way I operated. And then when I was training it, that's what I would train, exactly what I'm saying to you.
Yeah, I mean, do you think you can't speak to them obviously, but like the handlers, whoever handled Mark Haddock and what was that other fella, Gary Haggerty, speaking of fellas who turned supergrass, do you think I mean, do you think like once they're an agent and once their handler finds out about a murder, like do you think it was a case for some of them that they just kind of let it happen because they have a good source?
No, I don't. I would no. It's. I know with one of them. I'm not sure which one, but I know one lad. I know him well. And I think he was investigated for 20 years. And it was maybe 3 or 4 investigations into what you're saying.
This was a handler that
Yeah,
was
yeah. He was being investigated when he was on the job and then when he retired, but it took 20 years. And there was a lot of, oh, but he would have known. And the investigations actually showed, but he didn't. So it was people were saying, but such and such was involved. And you're going, but at the time, yeah, that wasn't obvious to this guy, and he didn't know. And he wasn't. If anybody, put it like this, if anybody sits back and turns around and condones it to go, big guy, just get out there and do whatever you want, then that's you need investigating, because that's murders. Like, but where's the evidence of that? That's the thing. Is, are we talking about, if there's an investigation, a lot of these investigations have come out with public statements, but the public statement is different. The investigations actually cleared officers, but the public statement then says, but they could have done this. So the public statement puts a spin on it, whereas the investigation is actually cleared the officers, as in, we haven't found any evidence to prosecute you. So, but then the public statement nearly says reverse, to go, but there's things you should have done, you didn't do. And a lot of that's based on hindsight, because we know more after the event than we do before it. And everything here is about, well, if you'd only done it this road, that wouldn't have happened.
There was a 2007 ombudsman report that found that some special branch officers protected loyalist informers, failed to stop up to 15 murders. They also said that not as strong, but the report did find that some special branch members would kind of babysit their agents through an interrogation in order to be able to keep them from going to jail and keep them as an agent. Did you ever come across fellas doing that?
No, it's I even read some of the police ombudsman reports, and the sort of like the peace process era, and it would be that the police are telling a source or something where a target lives who's later killed, some innocent person's later murdered, and you're going, why would anybody need to be told where that person lives? The whole of the village, the whole of the town knows where it's like, we're nearly back to Northern Ireland's a big village. That doesn't make sense that a handler would need to say that. It's like the town people know where that is. That's not secret. It's not something to go, oh, he was, this guy was shot dead as he got off a flight into New York. How did they know he's going to be there at that moment? You're going, they've lived in that house for so long, and they're very well known. And it's the same thing with when it comes to interviews. This place, I think it was a good book out there. Was it O'Keefe? It's like Say Nothing.
Patrick, one of the best books I've ever read in my life.
But it is. It turned around and go, if you interview, even with turn around and go, if it's something like for disorderly behaviour, nothing to do with terrorism, when I was a uniformed constable, people didn't say anything. They said nothing. Wouldn't give you they give you their name. You'd asked, you had to put down over 21. But it was people, when they came into an interview scenario, they didn't look at you. They refused eye contact. This was the way they were trained by their organisation. It was like they were told to say nothing, except the basic details. Make a complaint. Get a solicitor, make a complaint that either you were abused or you were threatened, and demand a doctor and a lawyer in that order. And then you come out, and then they had to see their intelligence officer to say, this is who interviewed me, and this is what I said. I said nothing. So that's where there's a degree of naivety when it's sort of like a police ombudsman. Usually the police ombudsman is somebody who doesn't have a policing background from here, to go, but that's what they all did. Why would you need to say it to somebody to do what you always do? Just doesn't make sense.
There's certainly plenty of allegations, and I believe some of them, probably not all, but that the security forces and the RUC would use loyalist paramilitaries to do their dirty work. They would use them as like proxies. It's certainly alleged that the Pat Finucane murder was along this line. Did you ever even without naming them, and do you ever know fellas who engaged in that?
It's my boss, and he's chief superintendent. He's a Catholic. The deputy was a Catholic. The DI was a Catholic, Protestant. It was like, I don't see where this the whole narrative about using them. What happened is every big police organization is going to have bad cops, and the RUC was no different. They call it now the Glenanne gang. They had a loyalist gang, and the lad I'm talking about, the detective, yeah, one of the main offenders in that was a guy, John Weir from Monaghan, a Protestant from Monaghan. He just hated Catholics, and he joined. He didn't collude with the Ulster Volunteer Force. He joined the Ulster Volunteer Force. So there've been some brutal murders. There was he was involved. It was a chemist, and Seamus Heaney wrote a poem about it, and it was a brutal murder. And there'll be other brutal murders that gang committed. When you read anything, usually about that gang, it's usually his testimony. He was caught, 6 of them were put away. My old boss was the guy who put them away. And his top detective underneath him was a guy called the Sheikh Sheehy, Kevin Sheehy. He was the first graduate in the RUC, and he went to Trinity. He went to Trinity with Pat Finucane. He introduced Pat Finucane to his wife. Kevin was like a vegetarian socialist, big into animals' rights. He marched in we turn around to demonstrate for civil rights in '69 and whatever. Joined the police because he wanted to sort of do his bit for democracy in 1972. But he was under Frank. He was part of Frank's squad that my old boss put together to go, we need he got a heads up. He's in CID that there's some really bad cops here. And as soon as this guy got the head on him, he got then a secret team with Kevin being one of them, and they went to work and they put away, I think it was 6 or 7. There was others who didn't get prosecuted, but by and large they'd nipped that in the bud. But there's nobody has ever turned around and wrote about these good cops putting away these bad cops. It's nearly as if, well, who caught these bad cops? I go, but they did. These good cops put these bad cops away, and they were killing, they were murdering innocent Catholics. You go on. In fact, they abducted a priest who was a hero from World War II, was in the RAF, which was incredible. And the guy who secured the release of the priest was my old boss who went in the Special Branch. And so it doesn't, this whole thing about, it's running loyalists at proxies. I think it's all down to that. It's not everybody was held. Most murders are unsolved. Nobody was held to account. The murder clearance rate was low, but it was highest for loyalists. For loyalist offenders, the murder clearance rate, if you were a loyalist, you were more likely to go to prison than if you were a Republican. That's the bad. So when people turn around and going about, you're going, hold on, it's like Republicans are out murdering loyalists 2 to 1, but there's more loyalists being put in prison than there is. So it's like, the facts don't really add up, but the story of, oh, you're turning a blind eye and you're allowing loyalists it's really taken off more in the peace process than it was at the time. It's really sort of taken a life of its own, where somebody looks at me that go, God, you must be deluded, guy, to be turning around and explaining it this road. And I go, but hold on, these are the facts, these are the people I work with, and like these good cops put those bad cops away, and these were bad cops. And I'm not saying that everybody upheld the line, but I'm going is where there was evidence that there was good officers there that pursued it, but you wouldn't. The thought of turning a blind eye to let innocent people being murdered, just to me, it's just horrific.
I'm thinking there was I read a bit about I think he was in the UDA, a fella called Albert Ginger Baker, and he certainly alleged that for some of his murders, there were RUC officers who supplied him the gun before the hit, got it back off them after it, so that they could go through roadblocks and not be armed. Did you ever like looking back on it, some of these officers who got caught for these sort of things. Did you know any of them or work with them or at any stage?
Oh, the guy Weir was a sergeant in Newton Hamilton. It was actually a local woman run a cafe. She told us about him. We didn't hear. I didn't know of him. And me and the guy who I worked, Ben, we looked at each other to go, oh, she must be making that up. And we asked the inspector, big gruff guy who smoked a pipe, who frightened us to death. And me and Ben asked him to go, Inspector, we heard of this guy, Sergeant Weir. And he was going about murdering innocent Catholics. And we're told, don't mention his name again. So even as a young constable going into the 18, when I was like, don't mention him, because we thought they'd made it up, because you weren't. What I'm trying to say is, I wasn't seeing that in uniform. I wasn't seeing it in the SWAT, and I wasn't seeing it when I was handling. Was there bad officers and bad cops? Yes, there were. Where they were identified, there was good guys, good cops put them in prison. Was there ones who would have, who weren't put in prison? I've no doubt that there were, but they don't define what was, it was a professional organization. Whenever you think about it, in the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, there was both sets of terrorists and were almost let out in equal numbers. So it wasn't as if it was just you were going after one side. It was quite, impartial.
So back to the actual kind of running sources and stuff. Can you talk to me a bit about what it was like meeting up with a source? Like kind of how often, how much work goes into like the actual meetup, how much time you'd have with them, etc.
At times it could be once every 2 weeks and 40 minutes in the back of a car. And that could be somebody who's actually quite active. So you get 40 minutes let them give their bit of an introduction and talk about, did they get here okay? And we didn't have when it comes to tradecraft, there's always two of you, because you're trying to figure out, is he telling the truth about this? What's important? And you try to make a few buzz notes and to turn around and go, right, this is what we need to do. And that was it. You picked them up, you dropped them off. At times you had one person maybe to cover you in another vehicle, at times two, but you didn't have a lot of resources. So it's you were trusting them. It's like if they turned on you, you were toast. That's why you turn around and go, that's why it's a relationship to go, you have to be bringing them in to go, right, you brought them on. Why? Because they're happy to give you information. It's not as if you have them over a barrel. They want to work. They can walk away from the relationship anytime they want. So it's nearly, I'd say it was because you're local, it's almost how you do it on the cheap. If you're the military, you can have a Spielberg production. You could have a Gazelle helicopter maybe 10 miles away, and you've maybe 2 crews of 3 each of QRF ready to go. But if I could be me and you, and you're going, dude, we're on our own, and with one lad for backup. That's why it's all this, I see a lot of programs today, and the majority of them, it'll be somebody saying, oh, the branch did this. Usually the person did either 25 or 30 years in prison because he's been put in prison by the branch. There's usually an angle. Where was put in prison? The guy you just quoted was put in prison. I watched a program last week. A loyalist served 25 years for 5 murders. And it was a Republican. And he served, I think, 25 years for murder. And both of them were given commentary on the Troubles. And they were given their view about, oh, the branch could have done this. And you're going, but the branch, it was actually the branch put them in prison. And it's you go out, you meet people, they give you information, and as best you can, you put that in, and that goes into the system. And it's a poor intelligence is a poor compensation for evidence. What you want is people going up and giving evidence in court and pointing out to go, I identify that person who did A, B, C, and D, and it puts them in prison. But people then, they tell you in confidence, usually it's somebody, at the top, it's a source within an organization. At times it's not. It could be somebody who runs a bar, somebody who runs a business saying, look, because they've seen what these people have done and they know what's wrong, and they give you information, and it's now your responsibility to sort of act on their behalf, because nobody can be seen to do it publicly, otherwise they're dead.
Funny you mentioned the term Spielberg Productions. I actually heard that about the FRU in a book called Four Shots in the Night, which was about Frank Hegarty, excellent book. But by the sounds of it, it does sound like you'd way less resources and way you kind of had to do things like a bit more unsafe, given that you could only possibly have one guy backing you up and all that sort of thing. Did you ever? This must result. I think it is fair to say that the RUC had more informants and agents get caught than like the FRU, for example. Did you ever have a source who did get compromised?
A number of sources lost, but they weren't compromised. It was like due to other reasons. There's things you become nearly blind to. Either because internal relationships, factions, one doesn't like the other. But no, it's thank heavens, you were always very careful about, can somebody withstand a interrogation? Do they know that even we've met them, that nobody's seen us meeting them? That this was like a cell phones are only coming into it. It's like how you see clean your cell phone, but a lot of them, they were confident enough that they could withstand if anybody was sort of tackling them, that they could withstand it. So when it came to what you're looking at, that type of compromise, no. But I know I think it was a really steep learning curve, from a small society where people would give evidence in court to now we know there's a handful of extremists on both sides are doing this, but nobody wants to stand up in court and put them in prison. But we want the police to put them in prison. And that's where it's nearly like witness statements were put underground in the form of intelligence. And then what happens afterwards, everybody goes, but you knew more. And you could have prevented this, and you allowed that to happen. And you can't disprove it, because you're turning around, you're going, you just deal with what you can. And there's only so much physically that you can do.
I read about I'm pretty sure it was an RUC Special Branch guy. I think 4 of his sources got found out and murdered, and he subsequently took his own life. Am I thinking of RUC?
Yeah, I think I know a few handlers have taken it really bad, because I know there's a couple of guys, we got really, really, really good guys, and you get close to them. Some of them, I'd say, some of the most heroic people I met were Republicans who talked to us in confidence. And there was a lot of success of that. They saved a hell of a lot of lives. And it does, when you look at it, and then when everything stops, especially if somebody loses their life, it does have an impact on handlers, because they tend to, you're human, that if somebody, especially when somebody is sort of active and they are sort of, you're getting a lot of really good results from it, you're going, it is a tragedy. I know guys who don't get over it, and they sort of live with it if they can. And then it's always one of these things to go, well, if you hadn't sort of asked them to sort of enter the relationship in the first place, they'd still be alive. And it's all this what ifs. But when basically the wheels are coming off the cart, that's the only thing you have left is intelligence, sadly. It's just the way it is.
I interviewed Ian Hurst, also known as Martin Ingram, who ran agents himself. He said that, like, with the FRU, if there was any like slight inclination that a vehicle they were using had got spotted and stuff, it would get instantly replaced, would never be used again. Would I be right in saying like the RUC kind of wouldn't quite have that luxury to be able to have like this bloody almost unlimited car pool and fund pool and stuff, that you would have to, I won't say cut corners, but like couldn't be quite as careful as you'd like.
Yeah, no, at times, yeah, it was at the start, you're going, you probably find it was cars that their own right. your registration plate on it, and then all of a sudden you could have different plates which weren't registered to you, and then all of a sudden you could have the luxury of having a ghost part of the ghost fleet. As it went on, there was more resources, but at the start, no, it would have been no, you wouldn't have had what the military had access to. But the military it's like special branch traditionally in Ireland. It's who does the intelligence. So if you look at the Republic of the Garda at the moment, they hold the national security portfolio, local people, because they're saying they're better. If somebody talks to you, they talk to one of the soldiers, he'll give you an 8-figure grid and a map. Whereas you talk to sort of me or you'll turn around and go, no, that's Murray's Lane. You'll give the local name, and you go on. So local people immediately get the local context. Whereas when you're sort of coming into an area, that's more difficult. And the military have a completely different way of approaching sources than police. It's like soldiers and cops are just programmed differently. So I wasn't seeing the enemy. I was seeing offenders. I'm looking at, there's potentially good opportunity to stop these guys, because if they haven't burnt the vehicle and haven't got rid of their clothes yet, with maybe some forensics. So a lot of the time that's the way you were thinking. A soldier, it's very difficult for them because they're not thinking like that. And the best handlers and the best branch bosses were all ex-homicide detectives, the likes of my old boss. They knew the law inside out to go, and immediately they got a chance to go to get those two bad guys for whatever reason. They pounced. They didn't let it go on and on, because that's what investigators like. They're impetuous. They always want to, they want to nick that guy. They want to, and there's a degree of sort of ego about it, but that's a good thing, because and that was my experience of where I was operating, and that was against, that's against the South Armagh crowd, the East Tyrone crowd.
Okay, speaking of informants and agents getting caught, the IRA eventually developed a specific team known as colloquially as the Nutting Squad. It was called Internal Security Unit more formally. Okay, so while that group was active, would you as a special branch member know that there was a particular team within the IRA who was dedicated to finding informers and agents? And next question, did you know that it was like riddled with informants and rat infested? Steak knife was obviously FRU, not special branch, but I don't know, there may have been special branch too. Would you known about them and known how penetrated they were?
So if you imagine where I'm operating was basically like a third of the province of the 6 counties. So it's most of the border right up to, South Derry. We had our own internal security team, but it wasn't that Belfast team. It was South Armagh. It was South Armagh, North Louth, Para, and East Tyrone and Monaghan Para did not trust Belfast. So if any of our friends had to go to get talked to, it was a certain person within South Armagh who was more ruthless than anything in Belfast. So we had a different, I'm only starting to read about it, probably the same as you, when that you're conscious of to go, yep, they have something up there. But it was like the country, the borderland Para, they turn around and go, they had their own mechanisms and sort of and what you were saying earlier, almost like the break from the Adams-McGuinness line, where you have East Tyrone and Monaghan. Well, East Tyrone and Monaghan and South Armagh, North Louth, they were very close, they were very tight, and at times there was an exchange. So they didn't want anybody like that coming down there. Now, it's not to say that didn't happen, but they had their own guy in place, and that's who we had to cope with. So if you got the call that he wants to see you, you're going, whoa, you're on the decision to go, dude, we can resettle you, get you and the family out of here. Or it could be, no, happy enough, I can withstand this. And a lot of it's, you know, you're just playing it at the time. But we'd our own difficulty, which was different to this. What I'm fascinated with with the sort of the nutting squad is, where does it? I know what we were dealing with. I know precisely the sort of like the 4 or 5 people in it. And what I'm talking about is who the horse holder was. I don't know who the horse holder was in this Belfast nutting squad. Who was directing his caseload? Who was actually giving them the people to look at? Was it him, or was he being directed by somebody above him? I don't know that, but I do know it for where I was.
I have heard from ex-IRA men even that the nutting squad kind of had to be called in. They had to be someone else had to, yeah. Okay, so did you find that there was any difference in difficulty with recruiting from IRA or from UVF UDA? What was either one kind of more likely to become an age and kind of easier to recruit?
No. I don't know, for some reason I always found myself with Republicans more than Loyalists. I seem to warm more towards that side than the other side, probably because I had an inbuilt, more than anything, with my parents and the house and my childhood. I probably had that I lean more towards the Republican aspect. I go, I can under what you said earlier about, I'm not saying that you revered them, but I could understand more their viewpoint. Whereas loyalism just turn around and go, well, these guys have political strategy. This is what they want to do. You're just murdering Catholics for the sake of murdering Catholics. It just looked, both were sectarian, but one was just so, it was always like that. It didn't even try to hide it. So for me, it was always, I always tended to get on better with chatting to a Republican and had better results than from the Loyalists.
I'm pretty sure. I think the figure is around, if you add together the UVF and UDA killings, I think about 80% were civilians, whereas whereas with the IRA, I think like 50% of the people they killed were security force. Yeah, in fairness, there was a higher percentage of that. And was okay. So within, same question, but within UVF UDA, was there any was either group more penetrable than the other? I know the UDA certainly had a lot more members, so I don't know, maybe that played into it.
Yeah, I think it's I remember trying to get a second book out there and is trying to research this. The first terrorist organization prescribed was the UVF in 1966, and it had murdered, I think there's 2 or 3 murders, innocent Catholics, and it went to, I think it was 3 jury trials, and there was 3 of them convicted, were put away, but they were all sectarian murders, ugly sectarian murders. And this is listed in Strasbourg, in the court case in Strasbourg, and it said that the UVF at that time consisted of 5 to 6 members. I went, by God, a terrorist organization, half a dozen men, half a dozen madmen, extremists, bigots, are now plunging this place towards a civil war. They're going, so the UVF, I know the UVF was the first one on the block, and then the UDA seemed to form as like some big mass protest organization, where you see all these guys with was it masks, what is it, bandanas on their face, marching on the street, the civil workers strike,
with the with the jackets they wear, like the Wombles or something.
Yes, and they didn't become a prescribed unlawful terrorist organization for a while, because they were still trying to be seen as political. But I don't think, I've no experience of like the UDA and UVF one being easier than the other than I know the UVF here seemed to morph into the Loyalist Volunteer Force, and the majority of it ended up in prison by the time of the Belfast Agreement.
Worth mentioning as well, Colin told me this, that the first RUC officer murdered in the conflict was Victor Arbuckle, and he was murdered by the UVF, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Loyalists, as you know, the Loyalists, their aim was basically to, what they said was to attack IRA men. So translate that was, it was any person they just believed was in the IRA, invariably an innocent Catholic and at times an innocent Protestant. They go, it just didn't, it didn't matter. But it was their, what is it there, for Loyalists, it's what's the way to put it? It was so sectarian that you couldn't hide it with propaganda. And I think that the court, Ireland v the UK, it sort of came out and said that the UVF wasn't as sophisticated as the provisional IRA, which was more politically savvy. You could actually see one had a political strategy, and the other one was just about, it was, naked sectarianism.
So one thing, one thing that the RUC has been accused of on numerous occasions is basically torture, like beating confessions out of people. In some case, false confessions where the subject is being tortured, and the interrogator is pretty much like writing the lines for them, and then they're just getting them to sign it at the end. I'm thinking of I did an interview with an author who wrote a book about Kevin Barret, about the Albert Miles murder. Again, anything you came across with other officers, even if you couldn't go into specifics?
No, it was no. I know of it. I know of the allegations, the torture allegations. You're going, and it was, I think, was there 12 hooded men, 14 hooded men? So it all came from that. And when I wrote about it, I was going, to my mind, that is the lowest point in special branches history. When you look at the troubles, that it's went away from because you're meant to be the thinker, you're meant to be the person who's sort of clever, and you've got that knowledge and empathy approach. That's what they called it, knowledge and empathy, of how you're going to sort of flip someone to go, here's a really good argument, the drama triangle and everything, where you use that. To they adopted the military tactics for downed RAF crew, where it's you put them through, it's like that SAS celebrity thing in Channel 4, white noise, and you're going, who on earth thought that was a decent idea? I know it was quickly stopped, but that you look at that to go, that's just, it's just pure wrong. You can't excuse it. They said it wasn't torture. It was what is it? Harsh treatment or
methods,
punishment and stuff like that. It's a lower threshold of Article 3, but the bottom line is, no, you can't do that. It's a prisoner is under your protection. I've arrested quite a few guys, usually with Kalashnikovs, different other things. Once they're in cuffs, they're your protection. You can't touch them. They're just defenseless or vulnerable. So it's that aspect with the whole inhuman, degrading treatment and punishment. That's the term. You're going, no, that's unforgivable. So when I went to the States after 9/11 and all this, you're trying to tell this, different, the State Department, Defense Department, to go, dude, resist this. This is what's going to happen. You're going to have people, they're going to be brought into custody, suspects, and you're going to have some of your people would abuse them. This tends to happen. You've got to watch out for this. And it happened again. It's nearly as if it's like a democracy can't prevent itself. It's like, but no, you need to do that. And it was me bringing that lesson up to go, this is where we lost the plot. That you cannot do that. You don't even play at it. Confessions, I can actually say, I'm not wouldn't excuse anything like that, wouldn't dream of it. I try and explain it though, that in 1974-5, when the sort of confession thing was at its height, they call it the Crime Squad Initiative. And again, they used it against East End gangs in London. It was based on basically confession. But any cop killer anywhere in the Western world, so if you was NYPD, and you were brought in for killing a cop in 74, you're going to get a bus slip. And at times it's going to be, you will fucking write this down, you will. And there was that, so there's that aspect that you turn around and go, well, generally policing back then, you're trying to professionalize, you're trying to get away from that. And you're probably finding that churn, that's where it comes through, somebody getting a bus slip and confessing to something they didn't do. You're going, that's where a lot of that would have came from. But as it went on, there was a really good guy here, World War II veteran, Ken Newman. He started to professionalize everything, and he was, you could see him appealing to the sort of like the left-leaning media to go, look, we're cracking this. Not, we know there's a difficulty here, but by and large, that's not happening. That's not happening. But he was ignored. But at least he was accepting the fact that, yes, I can see what you're saying, but we're getting past that.
When you look back on your own career, what again, like without even going into details or specifics, is there anything you look back on and think, Jesus, like I was abusing my power, or I was engaging in something that we just talked about now that's completely unethical? When you look back, and I completely get that when you're up against groups like the IRA, the INLA, it's kind of like desperate times, desperate measures, because you're at a disadvantage in so many ways. But yeah, is there anything you look back on in your own head and like, Jesus, like I was abusing my power, or I was being unethical there?
I suppose it's I always find a definition of ethics is, it's like, it's people find out something that you don't want them to find out. You're afraid of them finding out. I'm going, it's like in uniform, you're going, you're dealing with a lot of stuff, but it was mostly like normal stuff. And in the branch, it turn around and go, it's, if you to do it again, some of those things you're going, yeah, under national security, you've got a broad remit to sort of recruit people and to act. And you're going, probably it's maybe that you could have done more. That it turns around, not so much that you abused it. It's like, I remember feeling at the start to go, I'll never make it past 30. That we're not, it's like, this is just all one way. It's like there was 3 times more members of security forces killed than terrorists. That's incredible. Imagine if that figure was in Gaza Strip or whatever. And it all felt as if you were just being overwhelmed with it, and you had no, it took me that my best, I'd say my only action against a terrorist suspect in my first 5 years of service was trying to prosecute somebody for no water in their windscreen wash bottle in their car. How pathetic was that? How pathetic. I wince at it. I'm going, wow, you couldn't even get close. And even when it came to the handling, but yeah, I worked with some great people and some very, very good bosses who knew the law inside out and really held you to task. But the thought that you've overstepped your powers, I can see how you could easily, but no, I can't. I wouldn't say anywhere there that no, we've or that I have, when it's unique to me. I know there's some, when I look back, I'm going, there's a few boys I talk to, I wish, you know what, if I had to do it again, maybe if it didn't, things would have turned out better for them. But I think that's more me in reflective mode, going, maybe it could have worked out better. But then the people I chatted to saved a hell of a lot of lives. They really did.
Okay,
It's
so
not to say I was perfect. Oh, I wasn't. I was mediocre. I wasn't that spectacular. I just sort of got along, and I was lucky to have really be surrounded by better people, and really good people.
okay, I won't keep it too much long. I appreciate, seriously, all the insight and everything. Invaluable stuff, seriously. I appreciate it. You obviously you retired in what, 2014?
Yes.
So you were there from conflict time into
into
post
place.
post peace process time, also from RUC to PSNI. What changed from RUC to PSNI? There's many would say the only thing changed was the name, but I guess you were there.
Yeah, yeah. I remember. Yeah, somebody said it was basically same shite, different rapper. Forget who said that. Yeah, and there was a lot, and you could actually see then there was a movement on where people like me, then we were the part of the dark force, and we needed to be, you know, people like that shouldn't be in the PSNI because they're contaminating young people coming forward, etc. So you could see there was that move. And funny, I went into the training side in PSNI, so I came into the teaching source handling. So went into that speciality, and we had probably going to be the future prime minister here, Keir Starmer. He was part of the policing board. We had all the barristers. One of them actually was a girl from Cork direction, and they were inspecting all our training material for human rights law compliance. And I told them, come to any of our courses anytime, call in unannounced, and they did. And we involved them in part of the courses and Sonora and role plays, did different scenarios. And then what you were saying there, spoke about the different things about what's the law say about this? What about the code of ethics? You know, and you brought out a lot of what you're saying. That's what we were bringing out in training, but this could happen, that could happen. Your source phones up and he turns around, there's been a murder. Oh, and he's been the guy who pulled the trigger. What are you going to do? What are you? So they'd never seen this. Anyway, they did all the material. A few minor changes where we put in modern terms to do with human rights and case law. But by and large, that was exactly what I was trained in and what the RUC was trained in. And the policing board, because the politics of peace, politics being what it is, everybody took great credit for having sort of reformed the bad old special branch. And you're going, but it's all the same system, it's the same stuff's involved. It's different narratives suit, because in this era it suits to have a scapegoat, and the easiest scapegoat to have is the local one, the one furthest away from London, because none of this fallout really makes it across the Irish Sea. Most of it stays here, and as you and I know, all politics is local. So it suits the sort of people like me who are retired, and you don't have a sort of like a network or an organization really to sort of defend you or with any money. You're the easiest given a kicking. You can't really go to the MI5 or MI6 or GHQ. You can't. They're still looking after national security interests. You can't go after the RUC Special Branch because they're still. So the only ones you got are these northern paddy cops, and that's who got the beating. But it was for Sir Keir Starmer and his policing board for his oversight. All the material, because I was the one who basically did it all and revised it. It was the same as what we were doing. So what you were talking to me, and I go, but I know what you're saying, and it looks bad because of what's in the media and what's being printed. But that's not the way it was working when I was being trained on it and when I was doing it and what I saw. I don't know if that's answered your question.
No, it's grand. I did want to ask as well, like, what was it like? Again, policing a post peace process, Northern Ireland. What like from your point of view, what became of these various paramilitary groups? There's some, I'm not saying this, but there's some that would say that now they're essentially just kind of drug gangs, operating under a respected name. Yeah, what became of the paramilitaries in this transitionary period?
Well, the PSNI, it had the blueprint, the patent blueprint, but that was actually done by Ronnie Flanagan when he was chief constable, played hooker for Ulster. So he actually did the blueprint of the patent report. Patent only added a few. So the policing changes. It always changes. It has to change. If it stays still, it becomes redundant. So policing by nature is controversial. It's just the way it is. the PSNI, people would say to me about investigation-led policing, you're going, yep, that's what it needed to be at the height of this emergency. But good policing is, or intelligence-led, good policing is investigative-led. It's led by a detective, a crime, and intelligence supports that. Whereas when the wheel comes off, intelligence is dominant. And you want, as soon as those wheels are back on, you want to reverse that. Otherwise, you're getting into dictatorship territory. You turn around and go, so the PSNI are investigative-led, which is good. They want neighbourhood policing. They wanted a big PSNI, big numbers, and they wanted the sort of almost a mirror 50-50 Protestant Catholic. They haven't quite got there, but at least they're aspiring to it. So they're more acceptable because of the name change and different things. And you're going, right, that's good because that'll help them. Now, everybody's expecting all these malevolent actors to have left the stage, but all of them didn't. The most within the Republican movement did. They towed the party line. You'd have a breakaway element with the real IRA, etc., and OMA, and you have residual aspects, but they're not popular. Nobody wants to go back to bad old days. Loyalists, because loyalism didn't have a political strategy, it's in the wilderness. So you'd have the provisional IRA, provisional Sinn Féin, decanted almost en masse into a single party Sinn Féin. And they have, I don't know, 38 TDs, a few MEPs, etc. They're the first minister. So they've done well at the ballot. You're going, loyalists don't have one elected representative in the Assembly or Parliament. So they were totally abandoned. Nobody was voting for them at the ballot. And now you can actually feel they seem a bit sort of like riled by this, because they're looking at, people they maybe shared prison cells with, or on the opposite wing, are now a minister or on TV all the time. And they've an element, there's more elements of loyalism that went into sort of ordinary crime, drug rackets, which is, drugs now in Ireland, as you know, in the Republic, and you go, Jesus, it's just awash with cocaine. It's like incredible. So they have went more that angle, and society is finding it harder to bring them on board. And then working class Protestant areas are feeling more left behind than working class Catholic areas. And that, the divide between the two, and I'm not saying when I grew up was perfect, but it was a lot better than it was today, than it is today. It's never really came back to that. But you have they call them loyalist paramilitaries. There's still an issue there. And then with a residual IRA, whatever you're going to call it, there's still an aspect of that.
Is there anything in hindsight, when you look back, when the dust has settled and 2020 hindsight and stuff, that you think the RUC should have done differently through the entire conflict, kind of as a general policy, that you look back and think, like, God, they wouldn't have had such a negative image if we hadn't done X, Y, and Z?
I think what when it comes to modern terrorism, and you turn around, it's like the provision IR professionalized terrorism. I think everybody recognizes that for the 21st century. And it's like half of it is the violent bit, which we all know. And the other half is the propaganda. It's how you get your message out. And the RUC were dreadful at countering that. So I'm thinking, me and you could be working somewhere, and you're trying your best to put these guys behind bars and stop them, thinking that the government has your back when it comes to people are trying to paint you out as if you're, the great Satan. That a lot of this could have been countered with factual stuff, but they nearly they hid behind national security too much. There's stuff that you could have shared with the public that went, I can see where you're coming. So all those myths and rumors were just left to build up year after year. It was like day after day in Republican news and on Public. And it comes to now, you're going to actually turn around and say, but hold on, that's not the way it was. It's controversial because everybody's going, it had to be. So I think that there has to be somebody telling your story, a fact-based story, when you're doing this, because quite quickly you forget about it all. Because, Monday's atrocity gives way to Tuesdays, gives way to Wednesdays, to Thursdays, and there's just a churn of it, and it goes on for years. and everybody forgets where it started, and nobody is really writing your account of it. And then when it stops and you finish, you're totally on your own. So I think that, yeah, if you had to do it again, there has to be something where you have to compete. You have to, where you can, is rubbish the misses, like the fake news, AI, where people turn around and they go, hold on. It's like, hit that at source, but very, very rarely, if ever, did we do it, and nobody did it for us. But again, my job wasn't that. My job was basically to try and stop. It was basically to protect life and protect property and not order. It wasn't to write an article to defend what we were doing.
Again, no, thanks again now for all your time. You mentioned you're writing another book. I'd love to speak to you again.
Yeah.
When you do eventually get out. Just as a final thing, was there anything that you wanted to mention that we didn't get to, or just kind of any kind of final thoughts to leave the viewers with?
Yeah. I know it's I think, as you can see, modern terrorism, and I've seen it in Iraq, in Afghanistan. I've seen it with police forces, and you're trying to tell them how to professionalize, whether it's Shia, Sunni, or gender, male and female. But you can see how, even with Hamas and Gaza, and you can see how Tehran's starting to go, and it's almost as if we don't learn from from the last time, the things we did badly, the things we did well. There doesn't seem to be any learning. It's just whoever basically can grab the most microphones is the one who's considered the winner, and that's the narrative. Otherwise, democracy, I think, would be doing a lot better against a lot of these threats that are basically threatening democracy, which we've seen. I don't know, it just seems to be more of them than ever. But the formula hasn't changed. It's like bullets and bombs, and a message that they're very good at influencing people about, and it's really, really difficult to counter it.
Okay, sorry, yeah, just one final thing that came to mind. Do you think that we'll be seeing a united Ireland in your lifetime or mine? And if yes, or if it did happen, how would you feel about it?
I don't know. As for when it would happen, I don't honestly know. But it's I know, when funny I was writing this book, I'm going, not once did I ever consider that I'm defending the Union, or sort of are a united Ireland going against. You turn around and go, you're trying to stop thugs. It's like, you turn around and go, whether it goes one way or the other, dude, that's really not of my concern. It's I have to stop you. Why? Because you're murdering people, and so are you, and both of you are bad. You're not allowed to do that. Will it come? Partition. Always remember thinking, God, if it had been a heavyweight fight, if it had been a winner one way or the other, it would all be so much simpler now. Back in, as opposed to a halfway house, a bit of a draw. They go, I will put your hand up and your hand up, and you all win, and that just seemed to sort of create problems. I think I'm hopeful, because you'll have seen this island. You're going, there's no difference from the top to the bottom. The Northerners are that bit angrier, Southerners aren't. You're going, but everybody just wants to get on. It's like the 21st century. Nobody's really that, I can say, fixated. They go, do you know what? You see, as long as you're doing well and your family's doing well, who really gives a shit? That's the way I look at it. They go, and then I'd be biased because I always wanted to play rugby for them. So that aspect, they go, that's the way I grew up, to turn around and go, and right, that I'd just give anything to wear that green shirt. So there's that bias in me where I'm going, yeah. And I look at Micheál Martin, and I'm thinking, you know what? Micheál Martin seems to make a lot of sense to me than a lot of politicians up here or anywhere else.
Very good. Thank you for all your time. Very much appreciated. Thank you all your experience, everything you recounted. I'd love to speak in the future, like we said.
Thanks very much, mate. Good luck. Enjoy the rest of your day.